add me to the stage here. Real quick audio check, see how I'm doing. My audio should be just fine. I haven't made any changes. I'm gonna wait to see what I can see in this chat here. Let's see here. I want to share screen. See what's going on here. Select the side, Chrome tab, entire screen. I want to see here. Cancel. All right. Loud and clear, huh? Audio good. Thank you, Benny Riley. I think you missed that last video, bro. Moonteeth, thank you. Meryl Gigi, how you doing? Oh, there's Shy Wendy Flores. George Abdulnoy. I'm not sure how you say your name. I'm really not going to try. Nelson Perez, I saw you in the chat earlier talking about you've been at work all day listening to the first 4 presentations. That's all good. Those first 4 presentations were merely preparatory to what you're going to hear here. We're going to tie the strings together on a lot of Phoenix material in this presentation. A lot of you are going to have some aha moments. We're going to be talking about variable stars. We're going to be talking about Clash of the Titans again. We're going to be bringing all this to the table. We're going to show you that Jason did not date the Ogygian Deluge. Jason didn't date any of the Phoenix events. Jason pulled all these dates from other sources. Never before has a single PDF been so complex and so packed full of data. I have a lot of free PDFs. There's nothing like this PDF here. This one's not only is there so much material we're going to go through in this video, but this PDF also is going to be available after the video. I still have to upload it to Podia. It takes about 5 minutes, but I'm going to post in the community after this video so you can download this PDF. This PDF has hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, it has hundreds of bibliographic sources. It's amazing that it's taking me 5 videos in excess of 12 and a half hours of material, maybe 13 or 13 and a half by the time this video is done, just to tell you what happened in one single year of history that has essentially been ignored across the board by all historians, by everyone. And yet I'm pulling data from many ancient authors. This is embarrassing. This is embarrassing that we've got to this situation where creditable chronological material that is easily verifiable across the board and synthesizes with what the anthropologist, archaeologist, and historian, scientists are saying the exact same thing about 1687 BC, what happened. And yet, you don't see any popular authors writing about it, talking about it, publishing books about it. Why? It's very interesting. Maybe we'll understand a little bit more by the time we get done with this presentation. I don't have any time to waste in this presentation. I don't have time to wait for people to they'll just have to rewatch what they missed. I'm going straight into here. You guys have already verified my audio is good. So it's ass kicking time. I got to do it. Yeah, there's something going through Texas. Big John's family has it. Oh, it's all through. My dad has it. Oh, Don has it. It's something passed through Texas, and it happens every single year, guys. Some of you are making comments about the mold in my library. I got an awesome dehumidifier here. Listen, it's none of that. It's something that happens every single year. There's something that passed through Texas. Everybody's got the sniffles and the sneezes and coughing and all that. It's just something that happens. It happens every single year, and it's going to continue to happen. There's nothing abnormal about it. There you go, Mark Reyes with that COVID shit. So yeah, that's all. So let's get to it, guys. first of all, in order to better present what we're going to present tonight, a small recap, because I know not all of you watched the first video, which was Easter Island, the Phoenix ruin, Ogygian Deluge, 1687 BC. In that video, I showed you that the Easter Island was destroyed in 1687 BC, along with other islands surrounding us in some of the Pacific, and that the information about Easter Island is very compelling, and that anthropologists and archaeologists, they have Easter Island wrong. They try to say it's only 11 centuries old, that these giant statues that were buried aren't that old at all. That's not the case. Rongo tablets were found on Easter Island, and they're contemporary with the Moya, the statues, and there's just no way that Rongo, which is also found at Göbekli Tepe and in Mohenjo-Daro and in Turkey, can be dated thousands of years apart when it's the same language. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, there's a lot of nuggets in that first video, Easter Island, but it was just an introduction to the Ogygian Deluge. We learned about Harold T. Wilkins. Harold T. Wilkins wrote these two books here. These two books are by Harold T. Wilkins, and they talk about what happened in 1687 BC. They go in depth about what happened to the world. He specifically mentions the Ogygian flood, the Ogygian Deluge, and explains what happens. And his explanation is exactly what I've been telling you is a Phoenix phenomenon event. And he didn't know anything about the Phoenix, never mentions the Phoenix. It's not even in his indexes. He wasn't even on board with the Phoenix material, didn't know anything about it. He's just reporting what he researched from ancient history. And that's what I like about him. And we're going to go into his material in this video tonight. Now, the second video, When the Sun Died, Decoding the Gate of the Sun. I did that video live with Martin Leakey. That was a really interesting video. We showed you the calendar on the gate of the sun in Tiwanaku, and we showed you the dating and how Tiwanaku, Pumapunka, Cuzco, a lot of areas in South America were all destroyed at the same time. And it was a result of a prophecy of the dying of the sun. Every bit of this is in that video. It's very compelling, and it's only a small part of what happened in the Ogygian Deluge. So part 3 was satellites of Tiwanaku, Ogygian Deluge, 1687 BC, and it was the rest of the South America, all the satellites, all the different civilizations going into Central America. It was also some very compelling material in North America, Hawaiian Islands, Yap, the Carolines, Metalanin, all of Pacifica, showing that entire hemisphere, North America, Central America, South America, and all Pacifica was wiped out in 1687 BC. And Harold T. Wilkins claims that it was the Ogygian Deluge event. We're going to see if he was right here in this video. Presentation 4, the fourth presentation. A lot of you guys like that one. That was the Sumero Sino and the Old World calendars killed by the Phoenix. So I showed you how the Sumerian civilization, Chinese civilization were very similar. They recorded the same things, and how all the evidence from that part of the world, the Near East and the Far East, shows that there was a massive destructive event in 1687 BC. So we're covering all these different areas of the world. We'll cover a little bit about India in this presentation as well. But the truth of the matter is the entire world was destroyed. It is one of the very few times the Phoenix phenomenon affected the entire world. We know of only 3895 BC for sure, which was year 1 of the Annus Mundi calendar. We know 2239 BC, which is the Great Flood of Noah, the 1656 year of the antediluvian period, the 1656 years of the book of Genesis. So those two events we know for sure were worldwide destructions. Thank you. I can't believe I started a video without coffee. Man, I must be out of my mind. So these two events, 1656 years apart, are the reason Rashi believed and published 1,000 years ago that the world was destroyed every 1656 years. And there is some evidence for what he said. And but I've shown that in other presentations, and the charts are on archaics.com. But This is the fifth and final presentation on just the one date, 1687 BC, the Ogygian flood. 5 videos for one date. And this one probably has more data than the other 4 videos combined. That's why we had to just jump into it, guys. Poseidon, you're going to understand why it's titled Poseidon Rising. Poseidon Rising, the Ogygian flood, the final part. We have to judge things by their effects. Not only do we have chronographical material that absolutely dates the Ogygian flood to 1687 BC, but everything that's coming from science, from anthropology, archaeology, even the traditions, ancient texts, ancient historians of what happened after the Ogygian deluge is absolute proof that the event did happen at that time. And you'll understand, we have a whole section we're going to cover in this video about the after effects. And it's really compelling too, because the world, the ancient world that you and I were basically educated to understand, ancient Egypt, Babylon, Sumer, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, even ancient India, and all that. This is the world after the Ogygian deluge. A total systemic collapse of every dynasty in the world at the exact same time. The world before the Ogygian deluge is a world of unknowns. It is even admitted by ancient authors that the time period before then was the time of the gods, the time of the Titans. It was very unknown. The ancient histories that have been passed down to us are almost all post-Ogygian versions of pre-Ogygian events. And this is why so many authors and so many researchers and historians get the facts wrong. They're not understanding. If you do not take into consideration the Ogygian deluge and what it did to the entire world, you will never be able to understand the unfolding of historical events. It's not going to make sense to you. But the reason that this presentation is important because of the data of what happened in 1687 BC is for 2 reasons. One, I'm going to reveal at the end of this video concerning variable stars. The other one is I'm going to tell you straight out. If everything that I'm telling you is true about the Phoenix phenomenon happening every 138 years, and I'm showing a tremendous amount of data sets about 1687 BC being a Phoenix event called the Ogygian deluge, then it is just a simple extrapolation to understand. If you count 138 years all the way into our time and in the near future, you will get to the date of 2040. That should open up your eyes as to the importance of this material. So, Phoenix events happen every 138 years. The only thing that differs is the magnitude. So we'll be talking about that in here too. All right, I'm not taking questions. There's no Q&A today, guys. We're not even going to have time at the end of this video. But I am looking at the chat, monitoring a little bit, see who's here. Let's see. I never heard of Bananalandia. That's an interesting one. Jamie Robbins, what's up? All right. Oh, Perceiver's here too. I need to email you back, Perceiver. I've been catching up on emails all day. I'll get to yours. Perceiver, you're talking about the Twitter talks. I think that's what it's called, Twitter talks. I'm all for it. We just got to set up a time. Little before we start the presentation, I'll just let you guys know. Funky Prepper and I, before the end of the month, we'll be doing a video real soon. Matter of fact, Bro Sanchez and I will be doing another collab real soon. Logan of Decode Your Reality and Waters Above Crypto and I are all going to do a roundtable. The last one we did was real popular. That's 3 of them. This weekend, you're all invited, but I'll provide the link in the community. But the Unfuckers and Archaics TV, yeah, Archaics TV are invited. That's right. Can't. It's not YouTube. I'm sorry. It's Archaics TV. Only so many people can fit in the chat room. So well, I'll be posting in Archaics TV the link for you guys to join. We'll be live with the whole group of unfuckers, and we'll just be chatting it up for a couple hours, Q&A and stuff. But I'm not going to waste time on small talk, guys. Meryl's hitting me with those dates. Don't think I didn't see that last date, Meryl. I saw a last video, 5239 BC. You're not slick. 1687. You're not slick, but I do appreciate it. Vidomir Pasalik, thank you, man. All right. Y'all disregard any coughing I do. I'm telling you, it's because I'm talking too much, and it's because of this shit that's going through Texas. Other than that, I'm just fine. I feel great. So, there are 5 key fundamentals that we need to remember as we're going through this presentation, because there are 5 things that were very obvious to anybody who listened to the first 4 presentations. Now, everything that's coming out of my mouth in this video, you will be able to read it and download it about 5 minutes after this video is over. But for now, you'll have to just follow me. So, in the first 4 presentations, we learned that something unusual appeared in the sky, caused earthquakes, red rain, and red dust. Now, this is everywhere else in the world, but where we're focusing on, the Mediterranean right now, the Ogygian Deluge. Also, in the first 4 presentations, we learned that megalithic stonemason workshops are found by archaeologists with their tools completely abandoned. All these giant earthworks all over the world, megalithic projects, huge building projects, never finished. And it's all of them, all around the world. None of them were ever finished. They were all in the middle of it. The Heleolithic Maritime Empire was in the middle of building a gigantic transcontinental series of cities. They didn't finish. Remember, they got cut 48 years early. They were expecting to have another 48 years. They didn't have it. So it's very unusual. Archaeologists know how valuable tools were in the ancient world. Sometimes it cost you your life. Lose your hammer, you lose your life. Yeah, tools were not like today. You buy them, forget them. You don't even open. Half the tools I have aren't even out of the wrappers. I just buy them because I think they need them, and I put them away. But yeah, it's that's the way. That's what it is with tools. I'm a tool guy. Don will tell you. I got to have my tools. Even if I'm not a contractor anymore, I still got to have my tools, because there's always a future emergency that could happen. So anyway. Also, 3, destruction afflicted the Pacific Islands from Hawaii to Easter Island, all of North, Central, and South America. 4, scientists and historians date this destruction circa 1700 BC to 1650 BC. The reason there's such a wide disparity, which is not wide, it's a scientific bullseye, because we're talking about something 37 centuries ago. So having a small window of 50 years is nothing. It's considered a scientific bullseye. But the reason there's so much confusion is because the Ogygian Deluge, as we have already saw, initiated a 25-year darkness period. So the destructive period continued way past 1687 BC, just like it did on a phoenix cycle of 552 years in the year 522 AD, which we're going to get into here. That too started a 25-year period of destruction. We know it very well. It started the Dark Ages. It's called the Justinian Plague period. But anyway, we'll get to that later. So 5, historians identify this devastation with the Ogygian flood. These are the 5 common denominators found in the first 4 videos. So, having said that, let's go straight in to historian Castleton, who wrote a book that I read. It's very compelling. He's a very dry reader, nothing sensational about him whatsoever. But he is convinced from his study of the ruins, he's an archaeologist in the Cyclades of the Mediterranean area. He's convinced that Crete, Thera, the Cyclades region, all that was wiped out in a massive destruction. circa 1700 BC. Scientific bullseye. 1700 BC is only an approximate. 1687 BC is a definite. They're only 13 years apart. Now, this disaster ended what anthropologists call the Middle Cycladic period. So this is real science here. It's blending in with the traditional data that we have on the Ogygian Deluge, and you're going to see a lot of scientific material cited right here in this presentation because the crossover is very, very interesting. That all this is being ignored by modern researchers. I'm shocked by some of these. I mean, you would have thought that they would have loved to write a series of books on deal. Instead, you had to get them from me. The Ogygian Deluge is mentioned in both of these. These are my books on Phoenix. My first two. These are hardbacks. These are my first two books on Phoenix. And this is the introductory level. Here's the introductory level one here, and this is the more advanced. It has a lot more data. Ogygian Deluge is all in here, but why? Why did it have to take an ex-con in prison? These books were written when I was in prison. Why hasn't someone else come up with this? Supposedly, all these modern researchers have read all the same books I have. I've seen their bibliography. So I don't know. Man. I ask these rhetorical questions because really I'm just being facetious. I believe that the real reason is because there's two reasons. One, they didn't really read the books that are in their bibliographies. No, they what they did is what a lot of researchers do. They just pull some books off the shelf, go through the indexes, look for what they're looking for. Like if I wanted to research Phoenix and just provide some real mundane BS Phoenix data, I could go to a library and get a whole bunch of books out, man, to look for Phoenix in every index. And by the end of the day, I've got 50 citations. I can make it sound like I just read all these books. I can just cite them all. But the information I have on the Phoenix is going to be very mundane. Why? Because it's all the stuff that's on the surface level. There's no deep research. To get really deep gems, sometimes you got to read books that are not even about that subject matter. They're about something totally else. And then you find something in there that just gives you an aha moment. Say, whoa, I never thought to look at that. I had no idea that Phoenix was interchangeable with the word Typhon in the ancient world. I didn't know that. And you research Typhon, you come across another gem. Oh, wow. Typhon was a winged demon in the sky in Egypt called Set. Say, what? So now I start researching Set. Look up Set and kind of find out that there's references in ancient Egypt that say during the Typhon time, the sun is veiled, the sun is darkened. And I research all that, and I find out, wow, man, there's a people that were in Egypt that weren't native to Egypt, that the local Egyptians couldn't stand them. So they gave them a nickname. It's in Egyptian text. What do you think that nickname was? They called them the children of Set. Later on, that was changed to the sons of Typhon, talking about the ancient Israelites. The Egyptians couldn't stand them, but these people were identified with a body that had appeared and allowed these people to enter in Egypt during a period of its weakness because it had just been wasted by Typhon. So, anyway, we're gonna get into some of that here. I'm sorry if I'm ignoring the chat. I just don't have. So historian Castleton basically lets us know that the middle cycladic period was because of the great destruction that he doesn't theorize about. He just says there was a wipeout of civilization circa 1700 BC in the Mediterranean. So, now, concerning Crete, it's interesting because a closer approximation is the accepted date for earthquakes and floods that destroyed the early civilization of Crete. Yeah, archaeologists that study Crete have basically determined that 1700 BC is about the time that all the great fortifications and palaces collapsed on Crete. That's independent verification of historian Castleton's work, totally independent. But and like I said, you guys can look at all the source materials you want in this PDF. You can download it. I don't have time to cite them all. They're in the PDF at the very bottom. Over 200 sources. So on Crete, you guys know that when these collapses happen, archaeologists found in the ruins giant bat-winged battle axes that no man today can wield. It would take a person 10 to 13 feet tall to wield those axes. I always found that interesting. And this isn't just something made up. Those axes have been on display. They've been photographed. So I've showed those photographs on Archaic's Facebook. I think also in some of my videos. So archaeologists also assert that the earthquakes destroyed the palace of Knossos at Crete around, direct quote, 1700 BC. Now, it's also admitted that after this, the Minoans erected and remodeled a much larger palace. This is called the Old Palace period of Crete. This is all within anthropology. It's all within the historical archaeological record from this dating almost perfectly matches what archaeologists have only guesstimated. So that's really profound. So the palace at Knossos, the old period of Crete, is said, this is a totally different source, is said to have been destroyed around 1700 BC. The same source says that Knossos on Crete, the original foundations, according to archaeologists, dates to about 2000 BC. That's 240 years after the Great Flood. So yeah, this place was built between the floods. Now, this means that 1687 BC Ogygian Deluge began what archaeologists call the New Palace period or late Minoan period. Now, beneath the collapsed Temple of Crete, it's a pretty gruesome story, guys, because this also comports to the historical record, which is human sacrifice to thwart away natural disaster. Archaeologists were horrified in like 1980 or 81 when they were going through the basement levels of the temple on Crete, and they were removing materials, and they come across an altar, and the skeleton of a young boy was still chained to an altar. That's where he died when the temple fell in on him. He had not yet been sacrificed. The priest bodies were not there. That means when the great shaking started, all the priests and all of whoever else was in there, they ran. They got out of there, just like the workshops that were found with tools and everything, but they were gone. They had time to run. But that poor kid was still chained to that altar. They were about to sacrifice him. Even the bronze dagger that was going to be used in the ritual is right there. Archaeologists found that too. It's pretty sad, but it shows you what's happening. And the institution of human sacrifice is also relevant to the Ogygian Deluge because of a story that I'm going to provide you even more details than I ever have before on the story of Perseus and Medusa, the background to Clash of the Titans, which involved human sacrifice. So they were going to sacrifice this kid because whatever appeared in the sky, they had time enough to round up a sacrificial victim, get him chained to the altar, but before they could actually do the sacrifice, they had to get out of there before that building fell on top of them. 1981. That's when it was found. Archaeologists found that whole setup in 1981. And it was called the Mountain Shrine Temple of Aminispelia. You'll have to look at that's bibliographic citation 283. So you'll have to look at that to find out what that is. So in the Mediterranean, in Italy, anciently called Italia, which was the land of the Chittim, this is the Etruscan people, the land of the Chittim. In some communities at the base of Mount Vesuvius were totally buried several communities. Let me explain so you don't get confused. In 79 AD, the Roman pleasure cities of Herculaneum and Vesuvius, Herculaneum and Pompeii were suddenly buried. They were all buried alive. You've seen the pictures, people huddled up, walking their dogs. They were buried alive by Mount Vesuvius, the volcano in Italy, by basically pumice and ash, and their bodies have been preserved due to that burying. And we have seen what Roman culture was like. We've seen their art, we've seen their dress code, what they're wearing, the friezes on the wall. It's a window into the past because the volcano buried those cities for preservation. Even we can even see what people look like, their anatomy and all that. So don't confuse that with what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what geologists call the Avellino event. The Avellino event was a volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius that buried every community around it, totally under under 30, 40 feet of volcanic ash, just like AD 79. It happened circa 1700 BC. Again, a scientific bullseye for our dating of the Ogygian Deluge, 1687 BC. So, this is the Avellino event. Now, interestingly, some geologists date the Avellino event 1700 BC, but they differ. They also say it could be as late as 1650 BC. Here it is again. We get that discrepancy. That's a 50-year discrepancy, but the reason we get it is because that area, the Ogygian Deluge, was not like a single destruction. It began in May of 1687 BC, and then it initiated a 25-year darkness. During that period, things got very severe. They got very terrible for people. This is why so many civilizations have no records for that period of time. Even Egypt, even Egyptologists, they don't want to admit that that was a reset. But they do say that that was an intermediate period, meaning they have no records. They have nothing, no development, and they have no historical records for that period of time. That's what it means. And it's called an intermediate period. Egypt has 3 of them, and they all perfectly parallel massive cataclysmic resets. So it's just a way for Egyptologists to claim that Egypt has always been one single civilization when it has not. It has not. So yeah. When the Romans and the Etruscans built new cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum, they didn't even know they were building 50 and 60 feet above the buried ruins of former cities that had suffered the exact same fate in 1687 BC. James Mavor Jr., in his book, Voyage to Atlantis, The Discovery of a Legendary Land, 1969, he wrote that an American oceanographic engineer believed that civilizations all over the Eastern Mediterranean were suddenly destroyed around 1650 BC. Again, that year, when the darkness was just ending and civilization was just awakening back up. It's very interesting. This is how this date keeps creeping in. Frank Joseph. Now, Frank Joseph is one of my heroes. I told you guys, I got nothing bad to say about him. I love all his books. We might differ on a few things, but that's no big deal. Frank Joseph published the findings of elite scientists who met in the year 1997 in the fields of archaeology, archaeoastronomy, geology, paleobotany, climatology, astrophysics, and oceanography. This scientific consortium concluded that the ancient world had suffered a series of cataclysmic disasters. One of those dates for a systemic worldwide destruction was about 1628 BC. That's pretty close too. That's real close. Remember, we're talking about an event 37 centuries ago. So being off a few decades is not a big deal. Remember, scientists are not like Jason. I like to provide exact dates and show you the source materials and chronological material and have you verify it with a calculator. Scientists aren't like that. Scientists provide approximates because approximates always give you some leeway. Now, but that's okay. 1628 BC. Scientists don't know about the Phoenix phenomenon, so we can forgive them. So, now the reason why they got 1628 or I also have 1629 here. The reason is because their data derived from a scientific analysis of tree ring samples taken from around the world, also taken from the ancient bristlecone pines of California, also from seabed core deposits and ice cores. So I can understand why they got a variant date that was that far away. You have to understand dendrochronology is not an exact science. A completely dry spell of years will not produce any rings. Trees do not produce rings if they don't receive water. This is why most trees provide 2 rings a year for both wet seasons. So they yeah, only in the winter do they really stop growing. The spring through summer a ring. Provides a ring. And it's just so there's so many different trees. Different trees do different things, but dendrochronology is not an exact science, and that's why a lot of scientists don't go by it no more. But some trees do produce 2 rings a year, so this is a problem. Ice core deposits. There's no way to date that because it follows many assumptions. You have to understand there's no humidity in the Arctic or in the Antarctic. Therefore, how did that snow get there? Today, only half an inch of snows, but the ice pack is 2 miles high. It didn't take millions of years to produce that ice pack. So, what's wrong? I've already told you that model too, guys. We don't have time to get into here. There's other presentations. The ice pack is formed in weeks. When a vapor canopy collapses, all the moisture that's needed for snow is there. And at the extremities, all that snow creates the ice pack almost instantly. And it stays there until something happens to where the ice caps melt, which is a lot more regular than you think. How do we know? Because we've got maps from the 14th, 15th, and 16th century that show Iceland, the Arctic area, and the Antarctic area with no ice. Shows land masses. So we know this to be true. Those maps are not thousands of years old. Those maps are centuries old. Vapor canopies come and go. So anyway, we'll get to that. When a vapor canopy collapses, that's how the ice pack is formed. It's almost instant. So we move to the next section, tools and workshops left abandoned. So as Crete was ruined, so were other Mediterranean ports and cities. The famous story of the flooding of Joppa finds its origin in 1687 BC. Joppa was on the Canaanite coast, close to where Rephaim and Anakim giants resided. Joppa may have been the origin of the stranger Ogyges, who, according to the oldest traditions, was a leader of the giants at the time of this flood. Not the Great Flood. Now remember, in the Old Testament, there was also an Og of Bashan. Bashan was northern Syria. It was a capital of the Amorite Empire. The Amorites are known as the Amuru. The reason I'm telling you this is because we have historical records about this Phoenix event that mentions also the Amuru. We're going to get there in a minute. Now, in fact, Ogyges is a name derived from a root, gyges meaning giant. That a disaster occurred is further seen in that the stone masons and architects left their tools lying about the Minoan ruins as if they were in a hurry to leave. Where have we heard that before? Tiwanaku, Easter Island, the great copper mines of Michigan and Ohio, the Great Lakes region, Baalbek, all these places and more, where they just left their tools. Amenaspilia, the temple shrine I just told you about, when no priests, archaeologists didn't find any other bodies in there except for a young boy who died not from a dagger. The dagger was right there about to be used. He died from the structure falling on him while he was tied to the altar. So it looks like that was the norm. They had time to flee, and they knew during earthquake activity, you need to get the hell out of a stone building quick. All right. So now we have an archaeological reference that on Crete, all the tools were found right where they were, and a young boy is left on an altar. Everybody ran. Same thing we found in the other presentations all around the world. It's the same story, and the same time. So we'll get to what appeared in the sky here in a little while. You'd probably run too. An amazing megalithic quarry was discovered at Pieria, Greece, about 15 miles north of Mount Olympus in the Macedonian forest. This is another discovery that hasn't really gotten any attention, but it's very compelling. It's an odd marble quarry from which thousands of tons of gigantic marble blocks were removed in ancient times. Huge blocks awaiting transportation lied stacked and scattered. Where have we heard that before? Tiwanaku, Pumapunka. Remember at Pumapunka, all those blocks were already dressed. They're ready to go somewhere. And then the cataclysm happened, and that's where we found them. Easter Island, all the heads are on a road coming from the volcano quarry all the way down the volcano road. All these heads. They didn't walk down there like ancient legends say. No, they didn't walk down there. That's where they were left when the quaking started. That's where they were left, on the road. So, David Hatcher Childress in Lost Cities of Atlantis, Ancient Europe, and the Mediterranean on page 148, a book I got in here. So he wrote that the quarry appears to have been abandoned in great haste, much like the megalithic quarries at Baalbek and Ollantaytambo in Peru. I didn't even mention that one. So, but Ollantaytambo also was destroyed in 1687 BC, but I didn't mention the quarries being abandoned because I didn't remember that David Hatcher Childress even said that. So, Childress asks, what had stopped the construction and movement of these stones at Baalbek, Pieria, and Peru? Notice how he connects all three of them. Childress is really well learned on these ancient civilizations. He knows they were all destroyed at the same time. So, why are stones that had taken a great deal of effort to quarry just left at the site? Had a sudden cataclysm and corresponding collapse of civilization and therefore megalithic building suddenly ended the effort of quarrying and moving the blocks? Of course it did, David. Of course it did. Apparently so. So, Konstantinos Zissis, that's his name, Konstantinos Zissis, provides evidence that the strange parallel grooves found on the blocks were done by sophisticated quarrying machines. Remember what I said. The world before, the Ogygian world, is the world. This is what the Greeks call it. The world before the Ogygian Deluge was called the Ogygian period. It is a period unlike the mythological period that followed it. It is a period of great sophistication. It's not like what our history books tell us. The version of ancient civilizations our history books give us is the post-Ogygian. It is the after the 25-year darkness of the 1687 BC destruction, not before. So, Zissis too remarks on the giant blocks scattered about. This could very possibly indicate that the quarry, for reasons unknown, was suddenly abandoned. That's Konstantinos, cited by David Hatcher Childress. So for those of you who don't know, Baalbek is 2,500 feet on each side. It is one of the largest. It is probably the largest stone structure in the entire world outside the Great Pyramid. It's huge. Now the trilithon in its construction. Oh, these are the three largest blocks that have ever been put into any construction in the world. They're gigantic. But the largest is still in the quarry. And what's crazy is it perfectly mirrors the construction technique that is found at South America and at Easter Island, where gigantic blocks are cut and dressed in situ before they are completely removed from the living rock and then transported away. Yeah, the great moai, the giant head on Easter Island, still sitting there. It's all done. It's finished. They just had to cut it loose and erect it, but they got interrupted. Just like at Baalbek, they got interrupted. This building project was transcontinental, going on at the exact same time, and it stopped at the exact same time. All right. So, yeah, it's all in situ. So, let's get to my brother Martin says, let's get to the juicy. In the chronological records of Marcus Varro, as conveyed by Augustine of Hippo, the land of Argos in southern Greece was ruled by a king named Phoroneos. He was the son of Inachus. Inachus is also the same as Anak of the Old Testament. So Anak of the Old Testament was basically the progenitor of the Anakim giants. In an ancient Greek mythological tales, they're called the Anaks or the Anaxim, the Anaxes. So, according to Augustine, this was the latter years of Isaac's life. Isaac being what? See, Isaac, grandson of Abraham, I believe. So, son of Jacob. So it was during the reign of Phoroneos of Argos, which, for those of you who don't know, Argos is Mycenae. So, Argos, when ancient writers claim that the flood of Ogyges occurred. What? So we have Marcus Varro and Augustine now writing about the flood of Ogyges. Okay. In the book of The Race of the Roman People by Marcus Varro, we read, there occurred a remarkable celestial portent. For Castor reports that in the brilliant star Venus, called Vesperago by Plautus, and the lovely Hesperus by Homer, there occurred a strange prodigy, that it changed its color, size, form, course, which never happened before nor since. Adrastus of Sicus and Dion of Naples, famous mathematicians, said that this occurred during the reign of Ogyges. All right. God, I am. You didn't think this shirt said I'm a gynecologist. You stop that right now. Show my shirt off. I'm a chronologist. That's right. It's study time. There it is. Historian Frank Joseph, an author that I admire, that I've already cited earlier, has published that the ancient chroniclers wrote Venus instead of what the object actually was because they lacked any knowledge of it. Do you understand what's being said here? Historian Frank Joseph says Venus was what they said because that's where the object appeared to the ancients. It wasn't the planet Venus. It wasn't the star Venus. He said they made a mistake. Now, and evidence that they made a mistake is the fact that here it says a strange prodigy. The object changed its color, its size, its form, its course. It couldn't be Venus. And the reason is, this is why I disagree with Emmanuel Velikovsky concerning certain events that he talks about, because Mars and Venus can't suddenly come close to Earth, and then all of a sudden, they're back in their normal orbits. That doesn't even make sense. I don't believe in a solar system model. I'm a simulationist. But even that model, under that model, it doesn't make sense. Because once something is deviated from its course, it will maintain the new deviance. That doesn't make sense. So anyway, this was an ancient mistake, and we're gonna find proof of that here in a minute. So Frank Joseph, excuse me, always sneeze twice. So Joseph then cites that this disaster occurred in the 9th year of the reign of King Amaziduga of the Hittites. Now that might not be the Hittites; it could be Hatti. The Hatti were before the Hittites, and it could be but either way, this king describes in a stone tablet seeing a great celestial body called Ninsiana that other researchers pass off as Venus, according to Joseph. What Frank Joseph is identifying here is that Marcus Varro is describing an event centuries after it happened, and he's assuming that Venus was what caused it, but it couldn't be. Venus has never moved. It's still there. It's still that little blue star passing across the sky. It's never come close and done all this destruction and then gone right back to its original position and doing all. It hasn't happened. something else happened. Frank Joseph says they misidentified it and said it was Venus. I'm going to tell you now, it was Phoenix, which are phonetically similar. In many languages, they're interchangeable, just like the city of Venice is actually Phoenice with a Phonice. Many languages exchange the PH with a V. And you'll see that in the PDF where I give examples. So it wasn't Venus, it was Phoenix. Phoenix. But I mean, that's good speculation on my part. Let's see the evidence for that. So in the Hittite version, this body, celestial body, was called Ninsiana. That's not Venus. So the Hittites called it something else. They saw the object in the mail. I mean, in the air as well. So Venus today was not originally known by that name. This name is an etymological relic that has caused much historical confusion with that of Phoenix. In fact, the two are phonetically similar. Venus can be Phoenix with a V, and Phoenix can be Phoenix with a PH, ENUS. Now, the object that we're told is planet Venus. It never altered its course, changed shape, size, color, never did any of those things. So it wouldn't have the regular movement it has today, by which the Maya designed whole Venus almanacs in order to they reckon time by the Venus almanacs, which are absolutely precise, and they've baffled archaeologists with this because they're so precise. That precision would not exist if Venus in the past had ever acted so erratically. So we have but here's real humdinger here. I believe what was seen was Phoenix, and I believe this because according to these traditions, the Ogygian flood brought with it a great darkness. Venus doesn't do that. But let's look at some more evidence. All right. So here's some more proof that Venus was inserted when Phoenix was the original. Velikovsky is convinced that Ogyges is a rendering of the Amalekite king Agag, a Hyksos ruler over Egypt. Agag was a title used by the Amalekites down to the days of Solomon, when Agag was killed by the prophet Samuel in the 10th century BC. You remember the story. In 1687 BC, the Hyksos power was emerging to control Egypt. So Velikovsky just might be correct, and we'll see why. But before we get to that, this is really interesting. King Saul was cursed by God, and because he refused to slay Agag. The cup of Agag, the sins of the Amorites, all that stuff was said to be full. King Saul stood 2 heads taller than any other Israelite. His genealogy says that he was descended from a Phaya. A Phaya is a root word in Rapha, meaning giant. The Old Testament gives us a clue that King Saul may have been Nephilim descended. So it's very intriguing when we find that King Saul marveled at the height of Agag. How tall was King Agag to have King Saul marvel over him when King Saul had to have been all of 7 foot? So I don't know. Anyway, it's just an interesting story. And King Saul went and consulted the witch of Endor and all this stuff. And you know the story. So in 1687 BC, Phoenix transit appears to be the origin of a remarkable ancient Near East omen text. This omen text from Babylon reads, "If there is an eclipse of the sun on the 16th day, the king of Arad will die, and the king of the Amuru will seize the throne." You have to understand the context here. The omen texts were a kind of early pattern recognition system based on actual historical occurrences. So in 1687 BC, the Amorites, already a power in the Near East, now spread their rule from the Euphrates to the Nile. All of Lower Egypt was under Hyksos rule. The Hyksos were the shepherd kings. These were the Amuru. Now, in the book of Jasher, which focuses on the Amuru a lot, they were called the Amorites. They're called the Amorites in the Old Testament as well. In the Old Testament, the Amorites are demonized. Yet in the ancient records of the world, the Amorites were seen as very sophisticated, very knowledgeable, and very well respected Westerners. In the Old Testament, the Jews couldn't stand the Amorites and they demonized them, always talking bad about the Amorites. So, the biblical record of the book of Jasher, already said that, shows that the Amorites were supreme at this date. So, and as I've shown you multiple times in my Chronicon and in my books, in both of my books on the Phoenix, I've shown you guys May 16th is the Phoenix phenomenon date. Depending upon what part in the world, it could be May 17th, could be May 15th. I'm not sure. It's that window right there. So, 1687 BC, Egypt was dominated by the Semitic Hyksos. This is according to PhD historian Stephen Flowers. He specifically states that at this time, 1700 BC, the Amorites were in power, or they came into power and stayed in power till about 1550 BC. The only reason he could say something like this is if something would have happened in Egypt. Something terrible happened in Egypt that left a power vacuum and left the Egyptians vulnerable. Because as soon as that event happened, all of a sudden, a people the Egyptians hate are now governing them. That's why they called them Hyksos. It was a derogatory term. It's called shepherd kings. Yeah, they thought shepherds were an object to deride, the object of derision. So now in Egypt at this time, Set is called Typhon. We all know Typhon is the fiend. It is a name for Phoenix. It is interchangeable with Phoenix. Even in Greek legends, some stories talk about the Phoenix, some talk about the Typhon. They're talking about the same thing. So, as the Hyksos were worshippers of Set, the god Set, associated to Set, it is obvious that the darkening brought upon Egypt was linked to the shepherd kings, the Amuru, who the Egyptians hated. The religious descendants of the Hyksos in Egypt were the Gnostics, who the Egyptian Orthodox priesthoods, the religionists, they referred to these students of the Knossos as the sons of Typhon. It is at this time when the Egyptian record reads, in the Typhon time, the sun is veiled. That is the Pharaoh Amasis. So, it's really interesting that we have historical data here from Egypt showing a massive regime change, and the Egyptians hated it. But the Egyptologists call it an intermediate period. They don't want to admit a reset happened. Just like at the Great Flood period, the rest of the world suffering the Great Flood, and Egyptologists just call it a second intermediate period. So very interesting. Now, Ogyges was earliest king of Boeotia in Attica. There's a lot of information about Ogyges. The Greeks didn't know much about him, but he seems to be a non-Greek who was very famous elsewhere. Well, this could have been Agag. Agag seems to also be associated to the Egyptian Apop. Apop also has associations to Typhon. So, Aeschylus wrote that Ogyges was from Thebes in Egypt, the founder of the Egyptian Thebes. He also, after moving from Egypt to Greece, he founded the Eleusinian Mysteries, the city of Eleusis. He reigned as king there when the flood occurred. That was Egypt. Now, the megalithic remains of scattered cities in old Boeotia lie where his domain was said to be. He resettled on higher ground and built the Greek Thebes. So he ruled Egypt for a while, which would qualify him as Agag. in the Old Testament, the one that Saul was marveled over. And not the actual Agag. You got to understand, Agag was a Amalek. It was a title of Amalek, meaning there may have been 30 or 40 Agags. It was the title that the people gave the ruler of the Amalekites. And the Amalekites were a very warlike nation of the Amuru back then. Excuse me. So we have the origin of Thebes in Egypt. I mean, Thebes in Greece being actually a copy of the Thebes from Egypt. But we also have information that the name Thebes was actually from Thebe, the wife of Ogyges. And this is consistent from a statement that I found in the book of Jasher. There's a statement in the book of Jasher that specifically says that when the families of the world were going out from the Babel dispersion, they named their new cities after their wives and daughters. Remember, Europe was a Phoenician princess, Europa. So a lot of crossover with a lot of other things that I have studied in the past. So Plutarch, in his book Morals, wrote that Ogygia was an island about 5 days' sail west of Britain. Ancient pre-Greek population seems to have remembered a cataclysm that had devastated the far west. Remember, I have many presentations where I've shown you evidence that in the ancient world, these Westerners that came and dominated Egypt and Babylon and Old Sumer and Syria and Greece and all this, these ancient Westerners came from the Americas. They're the ones that settled Mari, Mitanni, Hittite Anatolia, Urartu, Byblos, Ebla, Ugarit, all these great metropolises of the ancient world. They were founded by the Amuru. And the Amuru, according to what I've just revealed to you here, were associated to Typhon, the phoenix. Every bit of this makes sense because the old world would have recognized that the new players in the game had acquired their great power because they invaded after everybody was weakened by the Typhon. The Typhon weakened the whole Mediterranean. The Amuru came in and set up shop. The Amuru came in and set up shop. Why? Because as we saw in the first 4 presentations, what happened to the Amuru in the Americas? They had to leave. It was total destruction. The Amuru are the origin of the legends of Quetzalcoatl, Votan, Viracocha, Boquica. All in the ancient Americas, the indigenous populations saw the bearded white populations leave. They promised to return, but they left. When they left, they invaded the Mediterranean. This was the first great Mediterranean invasion. These people would later be known, their descendants would later be known as the Sea Peoples Federation. Where'd they come from? The Americas. Now, I hope I'm not losing you guys. I haven't been following the chat. I can see these deeper presentations aren't as popular as my Q&As. All right. So yeah, that's what. So we have a lot of information here that he wrote. Plutarch actually wrote that there was a place in the far west where all these people were coming from that was known as Ogygia. That's really interesting, guys. To me, it's super interesting. It confirms Ignatius Donnelly. It confirms Professor Waddell. It confirms Thor Heyerdahl. It confirms Lewis Spence. It confirms all these great researchers from the 1800s that were all saying that there was a massive cataclysm in the Americas and a massive exodus from America back into the old world of the Mediterranean. The exact same thing I'm telling you that's going to start happening in 2040. A mass series of migrations from North America back into the Mediterranean world. And those data sets that produce that have nothing to do with what I'm telling you now. I'm telling you what Nostradamus said. So let's move on. So while all this information is very intriguing, and yes, it's related to the Phoenix, the flood of Ogyges, we need to get to the bare bones chronometry. We need to see the chronographical material to ascertain, so you guys will know that Jason of Archaics is not sitting here connecting dots that do not exist. I'm going to now reveal to you the chronographical material that is undeniable, that all these scientists and all these scientific delegations and all these historians and anthropologists, they're right because they provided approximates. But we're going to do away with those approximates, and we're going to now assert confidently that in 1687 BC, that's when this event that I've revealed to you in these 5 videos actually occurred, the Ogygian flood. This is some really profound material. Excuse me. Now remember, Harold T. Wilkins, where are those books? Harold T. Wilkins, not a chronologist, but he went through, these books are awesome. They are amazing, packed with data. This book's huge. Small print. These books are fantastic. Secret Cities of Old South America and Mysteries of Ancient South America. This is amazing. These are amazing books. I love these books. I will reread these books. Always learning something new. In that material there, he is very specific about this great destruction being the Ogygian Deluge, but he doesn't date it. He doesn't even attempt to date it. He's not a chronologist. He just spent a lifetime amassing all the reports from North, Central, and South America about what happened. And he looked at all the archaeological reports and he was convinced, okay, whatever wiped all these civilizations out, it was the Ogygian Deluge. I'm going to read to you what he said appeared in the sky, how it all happened. But we're going to get to that later, because first we're going to get to the chronology. You guys need to know exactly what the chronographers have documented about this event. So historian W.J. Perry, this is fantastic. So historian W.J. Perry, he wrote a lot about the archaic civilization. As a matter of fact, he published his lifelong research in the year 1923. His book is 551 pages. If you count the title page, it's 552 pages. A Phoenix cycle. Total coincidence, right? Let's just move that aside as a ridiculous coincidence. But 551 pages of raw data in the subject matter of his whole book was showing that every single Bronze Age civilization and dynasty in the year, he says, about 1688 BC, suddenly collapsed. And the result of this collapse was that all the peoples of the world suddenly lost faith in the sun. He does not theorize as to what happened. He is not a catastrophist. He's merely citing the facts. From Egypt on down, he just cites all the different civilizations and how every one of them, like dominoes, collapsed in the same year. He said about 1688 BC. That is a bullseye. After 37 centuries, it is a bullseye for 1687 BC. Now, I'm going to read a quote from his book. He specifically said they lost faith in the sun, and that these dynasties during the period before this collapse proudly referred to themselves as children of the sun. After this destruction, they abandoned their veneration of the sun. That is very telling. Remember, 25 years of darkness followed the Ogygian Deluge. So let's Mr. Perry, Mr. Perry specifically, thank you, babe. Say, Mr. Perry specifically, he concluded, quote, the destruction of the archaic civilization revealed fresh potentialities in man. Mother right gave way to father right. Military aristocracies came into being. War gods emerged, and the world began to take on the shape that we all recognize now. Are you hearing this? The Ogygian period before this destructive event is a period unknown to us. It's not taught in history books. It's not taught in historical records. That's why all these archaeological things that we find are anomalous. We find evidence of technolithic engineering. We find evidence of fracture quarrying. We see hypersonic boring. We see laser smooth tolerances on stone edifices that do not make sense. We see petrified tracks from vehicles on Malta and in the state of Texas. Doesn't make sense. The world that was then doesn't seem to be like the world after the 25-year darkness. Because the world that was before the 25-year darkness was building structures like Baalbek with stones larger than city buses. It was building giant statues that were 70 feet high and transporting them. The models that the historians pass off to us today, like the Egyptologists with their sandal wearing, white robe wearing Egyptian masons with their little copper chisels and hammers, building something as magnificent as the 454-foot high Great Pyramid with technolithic precision blocks so smooth that you could pass a laser all the way down the surface of the casing blocks. I'm not talking about the interior blocks that you see today. I'm talking about the 4 blocks at the bottom, still lying in situ. Yeah, guys, it does none of this make sense. The models that we were being given are complete bullshit. They're total bullshit. We're the Ogygian cataclysm caused by the Phoenix absolutely collapsed a technologically advanced infrastructure. That's why they lost all their faith in the sun. That's why after the 25-year darkness, it took 25 years to come back. And this is what we're going to see here also in a minute. So that's just one citation. That's a historian W.J. Perry's book. You'll see it in the PDF download. It's called Children of the Sun from 1923. He does not speculate as to what happened. All he does is document the effect, the facts. Chinese bamboo books. In the Chinese bamboo books, we find an incident where the whole world quaked. Meteoric rain fell, rocks fell from the sky during a 5-planet alignment. The bamboo books date this in our calendar to the year 1688 BC. Remember, these are approximates, guys. And being approximates, most people who provide approximates always provide an even number, because an odd number implies something specific. So they provide even numbers. And that's what we have. This is the scientific bullseye. Now, what's interesting is we have to judge things by their effects. What happened? What is the Chinese bamboo books talking about? It's talking about a major cataclysm, and then what followed afterward was the total collapse of the Shi dynasty. So the Shi giant, the Che, I think it's Che or Shi dynasty, it collapsed and it was overthrown with a series of yellow fogs, and then a great famine and the darkening of the sun. There it is, 1688 BC. Totally different source, Chinese bamboo books. The mandate of heaven had changed. This event caused a dynastic change. A newer dynasty emerged. The older dynasty had to get out. Same thing happened in Egypt when the Amuru, the Hyksos, took over, and the native Egyptians hated their guts. And the new dynasty that had taken over were identified by the very object that allowed them to take them over, which was Typhon, the phoenix, mistakenly called 1,000 years later Venus. All right, so moving forward, guys. Still got ground to cover. Now, 4 different copies of the Book of Jasher have been found. We do not need to confuse the Book of Jasher with its forgeries. In one of my books, my very first published books, it's called Lost Scriptures of Giza, I explain to you the difference. Academia is convinced the Book of Jasher is fraudulent. And this is because a forgery was published in the city of Bristol, England, about 200 years ago. The forgery was researched by Oxford and Cambridge University and determined to be a forgery, and this allowed all other research in the real copies of the Book of Jasher to be basically condemned. Academia ignores the Book of Jasher just like it ignores the Colburn Bible, just like it ignores basically the Oralind manuscript. The reason I mention these is because they have Phoenix phenomenon events in the texts. And the Colburn Bible's version of the Exodus cataclysm is far more historically accurate than the Old Testament Jewish version, which is a redaction, and basically it's almost all made up. The Jewish Old Testament version is not the real version of what happened in 1447 BC when the doom shape appeared in the sky, and all these people like Dana, like the Danan led by Denos and Cecrops. They led their people away from Egypt and they founded Greek cities and Greek countries. The Old Testament version is completely off, and this is why you already understand who owns most of the publishing venues in the world. The same people that wrote the Old Testament. So these publishing venues are always demonizing things like the Oralind manuscript, the Colburn Bible. I have a video on the Colburn Bible, so fantastic, about what happened. It's describing the true history of the Exodus from Egypt. It puts everything back into its proper perspective without all the glorifying of the Jews that we find in the text today. So, Book of Jasher is one of those books. It is a chronological book. I have not found a single chronological error in the Book of Jasher. It is a book that fascinates me. The copy of the Book of Jasher that I condone is the Albinus Alcune translation from 800 AD. This is the same copy. Another copy was found later to confirm the Albinus Alcune translation. Another copy was found in the 1800s in Gonza of Persia. Now, this is very important for you to understand. There is a huge movement to discredit the Book of Jasher. Yet in the chronology, the Book of Jasher is arranged in the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix. 3895 BC is year 1 in the Book of Jasher. 1656, the Great Flood of Genesis, being our 2239 BC, is also dated perfectly in the Book of Jasher. Also in the Book of Jasher, we have the abduction of Dinah. When Dinah was abducted, her brothers came and told Jacob, "Hey man, the men of Shechem and Canaan, man, have kidnapped our sister." And Jacob demanded Dinah's return, and the men of Shechem laughed and scolded. And so Jacob, his sons. Now Jacob was already old, and he had retainers, he had soldiers, he had servants, and his sons already had families, and they had servants and they had soldiers. So they get together, and in the Book of Jasher, they basically call them out. They're going to fight over the return of Dinah from the city of Shechem. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, in his epic work, The Secrets of Time, specifically dates the abduction of Dinah to the year 1687 BC. This is the Ogygian Deluge. But this is in Canaan, or Canaan, the land of Canaan, Palestine. So they didn't experience a flood in that area. But what they did experience was, according to the Book of Jasher, Jacob prayed unto God when they were surrounded by 7 groups of Canaanites and they were about to start fighting them. Jacob prayed to God, and suddenly the sun went dark, and it wasn't the moon eclipsing it. The sun went dark, and rocks fell from the sky and landed on the Canaanites, but didn't land on the sons the sons of Jacob and their retainers. So after the rocks fell down, the sons of Jacob and their servants and soldiers went in there and started butchering all the Canaanites, and they rescued Dinah. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because biblical chronologist Stephen Jones specifically dates that event to 1687 BC using the Book of Jasher. Good stuff. Now, also, here's another interesting aside. One Tux, thank you, sir. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, in his book, The Secrets of Time, using multiple sources, also dated historical events in Annus Mundi reckoning. He didn't just date everything in the Bible using the BC system we have. He also used the original Old World's calendar, the Annus Mundi, such as year 1 being 3895 BC, 1656 years of the pre-flood world being the antediluvian period that's found in Genesis with the 10 patriarchs, this 1656 year being 2239 BC. So he biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, he's got, my hat's off to him. My hat is off to him. But for the abduction of Dinah, which happened at the same time as the sun darkening and earthquake, it was an earthquake and rocks falling from the sky when the sun darkened that allowed the sons of Jacob to defeat the Canaanites. So he dated this at 1687 BC in his chronology in the back of his book in the appendix. But he also dated it at 2208 Annus Mundi. That's 2208th year of the Old World's calendar. So by two different calendars, he dated the same event. Why is that important? I'm going to tell you why. Because 360-something years ago, Archbishop James Ussher wrote Annals of the World. Annals of the World was written by Archbishop James Ussher. This book is gigantic. This is a new version of the 360-year-old chronology that he put out 360 years ago. This is huge. The reason it's relevant about 2208 is because 360 years ago, citing these men here, Hellenicus, Castor, Thales, Diodorus Siculus, Alexander Polyhistor, Julius Africanus, and Eusebius, citing these sources, Archbishop James Ussher specifically said that the Ogygian Deluge, he said Ogygian, the Ogygian Deluge occurred in the year 2208, Annus Mundi. There it is, guys. For those of you who don't know, the early Masonic records and the Masonic Constitution, the early Masonic Inigo Jones document, the Wood manuscript, some of the oldest Masonic documents, all dated events in world history using the Annus Mundi system. This is the record of the world's events that was designed in the Alexandrian library. So, oh, I better charge my laptop. Had something unplugged. There we go. Yes, sir. Jamie Robbins, I'm in my zone. We're not done. I got some truth bombs in here. So, Archbishop James Ussher in 1658 published that book I just showed you. 1658. In that book, Annals of the World, he's very specific. The Ogygian Deluge occurred in the year 2208. Well, in my Chronicon, which is independent research from Stephen Jones, and I cite my own sources, and Stephen Jones material has nothing to do with it, in my Chronicon, which is gigantic. Many of you know what I'm talking about. In my Chronicon, 1687 BC is the year 2208 Annus Mundi. Has nothing to do with Archbishop James Ussher. Also, in the Phoenix chronology, every 138 years, this is important, guys. Let me get a calculator out. This is important. 2208. There's the number for all of you to see. 2208 divided by the Phoenix number of 138 is 16. 2208 is perfectly divisible by 138. 2208 is the year 1687 BC. It is the Phoenix phenomenon. So, all these things correspond with each other, guys. So Manetho's Egyptian chronology. Remember, Manetho, you gotta understand, Manetho has some problems because we're dealing with a Greek-educated man in the Roman world who's looking back on Egyptian history 600 years after the last Egyptian dynasty had collapsed. Do you follow me? He's using references. He didn't live back in these times. So we can afford him a measure of, some mistakes. There was some problems because I've showed you guys multiple times on my channel and in my published books. I have given you examples where a zero was added between the transmission of historical events depicted by Egyptians that was given to Greeks. When the Egyptians would say something, for some reason, when the Greeks received it, they always added a zero. And I've shown, I'm not the only one. There are many scholars and academics who have called this out. So, let's look at that. Let's look at that. All right. So concerning Manetho's Egyptian chronology, it does contain a very startling find. His concern was the age of the world when gods and demigods ruled over Egypt. Manetho, he obviously had access to very accurate chronological records. The reign of the gods, according to him, was 17,520 years. Now, some of you have seen my video on Manetho and the three great floods, because that's what he's talking about. 17,520 years is wrong. There was no Egypt back then. This is the Graham Hancock version of history. Yeah, you can't take that. No academics, no real historians take Graham Hancock seriously, so you shouldn't either. That's some hyperinflated Marvel Comics version of history. It's wrong. Where we see it's absolutely precise is in the transmission era from Egyptian to Greek, where the Greeks always added a zero. If you remove that zero, you're left with 1,750 years. Why is this important? The key is Manetho said that the 1,752 year period began when gods ruled over Egypt. Well, we already know what date that was. By many different species of analysis, so many videos, published books, you already know. 3439 BC, the Anuna, under Enki, appeared in the ancient world in the Sumerian records. It was 1,200 years before the Great Flood, or 432,000 shars, or turnings of the stars. It all calendrically fits absolutely perfect. Manetho is right. 3439 BC was 12 centuries before the Great Flood. 1,752 years later was 1687 BC, when, according to Manetho, the age of gods and heroes came to an end. You can't make this shit up. That is absolutely precise. 3439 BC is 1,752 years to 1687 BC, the Ogygian flood. The historian Manetho nailed it. So, yeah, it's crazy, guys. It's so crazy how precise that is. So crazy. Remember, the Ogygian period was a period of, like, a golden age. It was a great period of gods and heroes and all that, and it all came to an end. The Phoenix phenomenon ended that world, and the Amuru from the Americas came in and filled the power vacuum. The same way that centuries later in the Trojan War, the Amuru from the Atlantic, Atlantis, would also come in, called the Sea Peoples Federation, and again do the same thing they did centuries earlier after the Ogygian Deluge. Every time we have these epic cataclysms, Westerners from the Americas come in their fleets. Yeah, history repeats itself, guys. It's just with variations. So yes, Manetho absolutely nailed it. Can't beat that. 3439 BC, the appearance of the gods in Egypt when the Gihon flood happened. Where's the Gihon? What do ancient writers say the Nile River used to be called? It wasn't called the Nile. It was called the Gihon River. And in 3439 BC, 1/3 of the world's population died in a massive series of disasters and flooding caused by the appearance of the Nemesis X object. When the Nemesis X object appeared, right after that, after the destruction was over, after 1/3 of the world was killed, during a period of famine, suddenly appeared Enki with a bunch of Anuna, benefactors, and they came with their tools, they came with their knowledges, and they absolutely shared as benefactors all these things, and they're considered the founders of civilization. It is the same story told in 1687 BC with the departure of the Westerners from the Americas, and when they left behind traditions of Votan, Viracocha, Bochica, Quetzalcoatl, and so many others. So, man. 91 Oki. I hope federal agents hear you and wonder what the F they're working for Archaics. I'm going to let you know, man. I'm not going into specifics, man, but I know that I'm protected. I know that I have additional protection with the Oversoul. I know that my steps are guided, and I know that I'm a man on a mission, and a man on a mission that basically it necessarily implies that there is a force operative that's making sure that I get to do what it is I need to do. But in response to your little comment, I'm going to tell you that I am fairly confident that outside the context of the Oversoul, that I've got some people watching me, and I'm pretty cool with that. And I'll just leave it at that. Man, I'm talking too much. So we got more ground to cover. I got some truth drops for you guys. Now, let's see. So the total destruction of the ancient Americas is interesting in light of the calendrics. As shown in the previous presentations, the Anno Domini calendar was created to hide the Phoenix cycle of 552 years. Such period has happened in 522 AD. The 522 AD Phoenix event is what started the Dark Ages. This is the Justinian plague period. I have a video about the Anno Domini calendar, the harrowing truth about the Anno Domini calendar. The calendar we're under today was created by the papacy to hide the very phenomenon I'm educating you about now. And I have the documents, I have the receipts. In that video, I show you the old books that even say this. So that the ancient Americas was destroyed. Remember, if something is true, we're always going to be able to see it from multiple different mathematical vantage points. I tell you guys that all the time. Nothing has changed. I have shown you multiple mathematical vantage points just in this one presentation, but this one you should not ignore because it's more evidence that we live in a controlled construct. The Anno Domini calendar was specifically designed in 526 to hide the 552-year Phoenix phenomenon. The AD BC calendar took over 800 years to even spread out, but today it's universally used by all countries. It's now the official calendar. It is a calendar that was designed ex post facto. The first 525 years of the calendar weren't even a part of the calendar because it was invented in 526, 4 years after an event that caused it to be invented so they could hide that event. That event was the appearance of both the Phoenix and the Nemesis X object in the same year, 522 AD, the only time in all of world history it has ever happened. It is the only time in all of world history it could have happened. I've measured it, guys. I've taken a calculator and gone 138 years back, thousands of years, and I've gone every 792 years back, thousands of years, and they never connect. So, yeah, it's all very interesting. It's all very interesting. So, but here's evidence that we're in a construct. Here is perfect evidence. The AD calendar was invented to hide the Phoenix, but it's the AD calendar that actually reveals a isometric palindrome involving 1687 BC. All the Americas were destroyed. What were calendars doing in the ancient world? What have I educated you about calendars? The Mayan calendar? They are countdowns to destructions. So, this is really intriguing. Many scholars believe the Olmec calendar began 3374 BC. 3374 BC for the Olmec dating system is exactly 1687 years to the year 1687 BC. Going forward and backward in time, a calendrical palindrome, we find this only because of the ex post facto implementation of the AD calendar, which didn't exist until long after this history was over. We live in a construct, and we are confined by the very calendars that have been implemented throughout history. So let's move on. Anybody can add it up. 3374 BC minus 1687 is 1687 BC. You just can't make this shit up. All human civilizations caught by surprise 552 years after the Great Flood because it wasn't the 600th year. This is what I told you in the last. This was about the fourth video. The fourth video was to show you that the ancients were very well aware of the Anunnaki neurochronology of great years that were 600 every 600 years. They did not know about the 552-year Phoenix cycle because it's a new calendar that was implemented at the Great Flood in 2239 BC. So they thought they had 48 years to go. Thank you, Kimberly. They thought they had 48 years to go, and this is why all the tools were abandoned. This is why that poor kid was tied to that altar where he died. They thought they had 48 more years, but then suddenly this object appears in the sky, changes everything. Massive worldwide earthquake. Rocks fall from the sky. The sky grows dark. The sun dies. And then it doesn't come back for 25 years. Everything changed. The whole world changed. So, all right. The unexpected Phoenix cataclysm induced men to abandon their faith in the gods who had given them the calendar. This is why the 600-year great year fell into disrepute. Just like historian W.J. Perry said earlier in Children of the Sun. He didn't know why, but every civilization in the world collapsed, according to him, in 1688 BC, and they lost faith in the sun. So, this event had them abandon their gods, who had given them the calendar, abandoning large-scale megalithic construction projects. The world was no longer a place of order. It had now become a place of chaos. There was no longer any reason to continue building all these megalithic projects. Why? You didn't know when the next destruction was going to happen if you'd even be able to finish building. It's terrible. It's terrible. Thank you, Singularity. It's all about that 1687 tonight. So, Ancient Chinese Encyclopedia, Sing Li Ta Shun Shao. I hope I said that right. And man, if I did say that right, please, somebody from China, let me know. Jahar Li. So, anyway, this text, this Ancient Chinese Encyclopedia, refers to the Great Year as the interval between two successive catastrophes. Wonder where they got that idea. When the seabed is carried when the sea is carried out of its bed, mountains spring out of the ground. What happened in 1687 BC in the Andes Mountains? Well, we know because we found the quays, the wharfs. We found the original fossilized coastlines around Pumapunka and Tiwanaku and the pyramid Acapana. We know damn well that Tiwanaku was not built at 12,500 foot elevation. It was built at almost at sea level because it has docks. Ships used to go there. And the traditions about the death of the sun and the birth of the mountains is true. In 1687 BC, in the Ogygian Deluge, Tiwanaku and several other South American cities got elevated to heights that preserved them for archaeologists to be able to find later. Yeah. It's too cold to live up there. It's way too cold to live up there. So, check this out. The Buddhist text, Visuddhimagga, tells of world cycles between worldwide catastrophes. That's another one. That's really interesting, guys. Again, both the ancient Middle East and Mesoamerica believe that the culmination of each age was marked by periodic, predictable cataclysms. What I tell you in the earlier videos, how did the ancient Americas after the Ogygian flood design their calendars? They designed their calendars as deaths of the sun. The sun died in 2239 BC at the Great Flood. The sun died again and created a 25-year darkness in 1687 BC, the Ogygian Deluge. In 1135 BC, in the final year of Pharaoh Seknakti, we find out all kinds of destruction. The sun darkened, Tuatha De Danann invaded ancient Ireland. Excuse me. Oh, well, that's a whole nother video. But 1135 BC, we have so much that happened. We're going to get into that. We're going to do a whole video on that one as well. But every 552 years in the ancient world, these cycles, they realized by 1135 BC, they knew now, oh, wow, there's a new cycle. It's every 552 years. And this is why we have ancient records that say the world is destroyed every 1656 years. This is why. 1656 years after the Great Flood was 583 BC, when the sun darkened as predicted by Thales of Miletus, who was a Phoenician by remote descent, and a lot of other things, like the Pythian calendar and the Japanese, was it Mihan Shoki calendar? They all started. There's a lot of things that changed in 583 BC. But I'm going off on tangents. Those are other videos. So, let's see. All right. So yeah, that was the sun calendar system. You know, the water sun, the stone sun, the earth sun, what are all those, the wind sun, all this stuff. And remember, the future darkening of the sun, May 2040, the breaking of the sixth seal, when the sun turns black as sackcloth and the moon turns blood red, just like every other time we've seen the Phoenix phenomenon, which we're going to get to in a minute. Right now, Harold T. Wilkins is next. Now you're going to know what they saw in the sky. So it's just like in the book of Revelation with the breaking of the sixth seal. That's exactly what they experienced in 1687 BC, but they experienced it to a much greater magnitude than we're going to. Yeah, I don't believe it's going to be near as bad as 1687 BC, because there's been many that followed on the 138-year timeline. They were bad. They were highly localized. Some of them were hemispheric. Some of them were continental. Some of them were regional. We got a bad one coming that's going to affect the whole world, but not the whole world's going to be victimized by it. I've told you guys that This one is going to focus on Asia. This one's going to focus on Asia and part of the Pacific, and maybe it may be as far as California. But anyway, that's like I said, that's all for future material. So the megalithic city of Dwarka, this is off the coast of India. It was submerged in the ocean off the coast of India and believed by Indian archaeologists to have been destroyed about 1700 BC. There it is again, another scientific bullseye for 1687 BC. So, in the Indian traditions of the sinking of Dwarka, we find that this event straddled two great world ages, according to the Bhagavata Purana. Well, there it is. 552 years going in the past is the Great Flood in 2239 BC. 552 years after the Great Flood was the Ogygian Deluge, 1687 BC. 552 years after the Ogygian Deluge, two great ages, was 1135 BC, when the sun darkened and caused all kinds of stuff, but that's a future video. It's also the subject matter of my two Phoenix books I've been showing you right here. So, we need to get into Harold T. Wilkins, because Harold T. Wilkins is very specific about what happened. He spent a lifetime of study. He never called it the Phoenix. He didn't know. All he did was collect all the traditions and archaeological reports from South America, Central America, and North America, and some from the old world as well. And he put together these two books that I showed you. Now, I'm paraphrasing. He has pages and pages and pages about the Ogygian destruction in these books. But this is the meat and potatoes. There's a lot more than this, but I needed to abbreviate it because I got just too much to go through. So, catch up to my chat. All right. So Wilkins specifically connects the Easter Island ruin to the Ogygian flood, as we saw in the very first video. But he also says the whole Pacific and the rest of the world suffered the exact same thing at the exact same time. Harold T. Wilkins said this. He was describing Easter Island, but he specifically said the whole world suffered this at the same time. So now in this, he says the whole island shook. Mountainous waves of an ocean, infuriated and maddened by some tremendous force, swept right over the tall cliffs and crashed onto the feet of the colossal images. The light of day went out. A night of total eclipse had come. A heavy black pall covered the vault of the heavens. Strange rains of blood-red water and white ash cascaded onto the causeways. The terrified slaves in the quarry workshops threw down their tools. Wilkins in the 1940s, a visionary historian concerning the Ogygian flood, also wrote, "Some great stellar body of a lost or a dead world, which approached our sun on a parabolic or a hyperbolic course, having caused a grave catastrophe on Earth, then vanished. A black cloud seemed suddenly to cover the face of the sun. It spread very rapidly to the horizon. The wandering planet streamed into our Earth skies. Tremendous earthquakes shook the ground. The blazing sky turned to night. A rain with terrible lightning, flashes, and a rain of vast meteorites upon the Earth. Aloft, the planet Venus seems hourly changing her color, course, and size. Our world was receding into space backwards from her old orbit nearer the sun." These are his conclusions based off these traditions. Now, whole countrysides that had never seen the sea were now drowned as flames descended from the sky and set ablaze great primeval forests. The Earth behaving much like a planet that had been forced out of her orbit. The light of the sun vanished to return as a ball of blood. The penumbra darkened all the air as in a time of an eclipse. He's recognizing here that the moon is not what darkened the sun. Then an immense cloud of reddish powder filled the air, followed by a rain of cinders. During this disaster, a second moon appeared in the sky. That is the Phoenix. It is the object that was seen in 1764 on the Phoenix timeline by astronomer Hoffman and 500,000 Europeans in the month of May 1764. All right, we're still trekking. We're still trekking. We've now got to the section, the 25-year darkness in post-Ogygian world. Now, Toltec Codex Quimalpopoca records that the sun darkened before the world was ruined in flooding, and later the earth was again destroyed and plunged into a darkness that lasted 25 years. Again, here's an ancient text. This one is from Central America that mentions the two great destructions. This is the Great Flood of Noah, 2239 BC, caused by the Phoenix, and 552 years later, which is 138 times 4, again in 1687 BC, caused by the Phoenix. Both right here mentioned. And the second one, just like the Ogygian Deluge, the second one in this Toltec document, Codex, says that the sun darkened for 25 years. All right. Julius Africanus wrote, after Ogyges, by reason of the vast destruction caused by the flood, the present land of Attica in Greece remained without a king up to Cecrops, which was a period of 189 years. What's being described here is that after the Ogygian destruction in Attica, the infrastructure in that area had stayed collapsed for 189 years. What does that mean? I'm going to tell you what it means. I'm going to tell you exactly what it means. 1687 BC minus 187. 1687 minus 189. I'm sorry. Okay. 1498. That's 1498 BC. Why is that important? Why is that important? I'm going to tell you why. Because according to the Greek historians, Greek mythology, Greek history, everything, the Ogygian period is a part of the Greek prehistory. It is mentioned by Greek authors, but they basically say they know nothing about it. Actual Greek history didn't even begin till the 1490s. Didn't begin at all. We have the great oracles coming from Egypt being set in Greek, ancient Greece. We have the Pythian and Dodona, and we have the predecessor of Athens. We have all these pre-Greek settlements now being founded, being peopled, and all this because the Greeks themselves basically say that their histories began with the mythological period of Jason and the Argonauts, and an event called the Seven Against Thebes. Because the third Greek historical event is the Trojan War. And the Trojan War is when everything changed again. So this 189 years absolutely makes sense of the Greek admission to knowing no history for the period. It's awesome. So Solinus in Polyhistor relates that the flooding was followed by 9 months of darkness. Okay. 9 months of darkness is what we got here. Now, Zechariah Sitchin, in his Earth Chronicles, the Cosmic Code, in his book, The Cosmic Code, he says, scholars are still hard put to explain why the ancient Near East came astir just at that time. Pretty interesting, guys. Pretty interesting. He's talking about 1650 BC, what all these other scientists are talking about. It's acknowledged that around 1650 BC, all of a sudden, the ancient world began awakening. And as they awakened, they took on the form that we've been educated to believe they were. in our encyclopedias, our history books, the ancient world of Babylon and Sumer and all. This is the ancient world that our books tell us it was like, but it's not the ancient world that the archaeologists are finding. We're finding technolithic precision. We're finding evidence of machines. We're finding evidence of technology, of applied mathematics. We're finding some really interesting things from the Ogygian period before 1687 BC. But now in 1650, decades later, it's admitted by science, and Zecharia Sitchin himself even admits that scientists are baffled as to why the whole ancient world started waking up at the same time. Why? All they had to do was ask Jason of Archaics, and he would have told you. The Ogygian Deluge in the month of May, 1687 BC is the why they started waking up. Simple as that. Real easy. Look at it. You record. Franz Boas in the 1880s said it best. If you record enough facts, the answers will fall like ripe fruit. Okay, so let's go with let's see. Sitchin notes that, okay, I already got that part. So perfect was the destruction across the Near East that even the sciences had started over. At this time, the order of the Chaldeans began observing the stars and making records. Do you understand what I'm saying here? According to historians, the Babylonian Chaldeans just started astronomical observations. So, for the previous 25 years, this was not possible, as the atmosphere was clouded with ash and dust. Now, in the days of Alexander of Macedon, when he took Babylon in the year 331 BC, and became Alexander the Great, the Chaldeans boasted to the Macedonians that their city had been standing for 1,903 years. This goes back to 2234 BC. So this is 5 years after the Great Flood in 2239 BC of Noah. So the Babylonian claim is pretty close. It may be accurate. But what's even more interesting is that they didn't say 1,903 years. That was Callisthenes, because Callisthenes talked to the Babylonian chronologist and found out how they factored time. Do you want to know what the Babylonian Chaldeans told Callisthenes? They told him that Babylon, that they started counting the revolutions of the stars 473,000 units ago. The Greeks later said that it was years, but it wasn't. If it was years, Callisthenes would have never been able to produce the 2234 BC date. Callisthenes reported to Alexander that it was 1,903 years, but the number Callisthenes was given was 473,000. This is so simple. Callisthenes was educated by the Babylonian chronologists to simply divide 473,000. Excuse me. To simply divide the observation units of 473,000 by 360. It's real simple. And he got 1,903. 1,903 years before Alexander took Babylon and had an audience with the astronomers was 2234 BC. Every bit of it makes sense. And this fact alone, without all the other data sets that I've provided, just that fact alone completely smashes Zecharia Sitchin's 432,000 years as a Shar interpretation. The Shars were turnings of the stars. That's all they were. That's all they were. I have overwhelming evidence. I've even got more since I did those last videos. Even overwhelming evidence that even Babylonians recorded that the time of the gods before the flood was only 12 centuries, which is 432,000 Shars. Simple as that. Now, so it's all very interesting, guys. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. The 400 I'm sorry, I told you some misinformation. It needs to be corrected because it's actually attached to an even more profound statement. Callisthenes is the one that took the 700 and something thousand shars that was given to him, and he calculated it as 1,903 years and found out when Babylon was founded, and it had impressed Alexander. And the only way he could have ever done that is if Callisthenes had been educated by the Babylonian, the Chaldean chronographers on how to do it. It's the only way it could have happened. We have evidence that Callisthenes took 720,000 shars and came up with like 1,903, whatever the number was. I have it in my Chronicon. But that's how he discovered Babylon was founded. But right here, we have confirmation of the 25-year darkness. Right here, in the days of Alexander, Callisthenes calculated, and the Babylonian astronomer priest told Alexander that they have been counting the revolution of the stars for 473,000 units. They didn't say years. They're talking about shars. Well, that's only 1,313 years. 473,000 turnings is 13 centuries. It's 1,313 years. So Callisthenes calculated back from that day of Alexander of Macedon taking the throne of Babylon, and it comes out to 1644 BC. Here is independent confirmation from Babylonian sources passed through the Greek sources that they admit they couldn't calculate the stars. They couldn't count the turnings of the stars because volcanic ash had been in the air, had been in the sky, blocking everything out for 25 years. Here it is right here. I find that compelling. So this is 42 years after the 1687 BC Phoenix Cataclysm. That's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. So it means that after the 25-year darkness, 18 years after that, they began making astronomical observations again. Even if they're right, it may not have been 473,000. That's just what they told the Greeks. So archaeologists believe that Minoan linear A was used in Crete from approximately 1700 to 1450 BC. Why is this important? It's important because it shows that linear A as a script was unknown prior to the Ogygian Deluge. It was unknown. Nobody was writing in linear A. But then all of a sudden, after this great destruction, linear A appears in the Minoan world and appears all the way to approximately 1450 BC. That's dead reckoning there, because 1450 BC is 3 years away from the total destruction of Egypt and Crete in 1447 BC when the doom shape appeared. Yeah, that's the Exodus event. That's the 10 plagues. That's in the silk Chinese Magawandi silk almanacs. It says a comet with 10 tails appeared in the sky. So this is the 10 plagues on Egypt. So in this year of 1687 BC, Stonehenge was damaged, and locals in the Isles of what we now call Britain would re-erect some of the monuments, the enormous sarsens and the smaller bluestones. Now, this is known as Stonehenge 3. You have Stonehenge 1, Stonehenge 2, and Stonehenge 3. This is Stonehenge 3. In 1901, Sir Norman Lockyer studied the Stonehenge site, and he, using arithmetic and measurements and all that, it's crazy, knowing nothing about the Ogygian Deluge, knowing nothing about the Phoenix phenomenon, Sir Norman Lockyer had determined by the way all the stones fell and their distribution and all that, and the archaeology and whatever he did, Sir Norman Lockyer determined that Stonehenge was re-erected, and that it was much more ancient, but it was re-erected in 1680 BC. Wow. That means, if he's correct, 1680, that means 7 years after the Ogygian Deluge, the temple that is known as Stonehenge was repaired and re-erected. So in 1662, BC, the Shang dynasty began. This is really interesting. It ends in 1122, 540 years later. But in 1662, the Shang dynasty began. Why is that interesting? Because in 1687 BC, the Shi dynasty ended. But there's an intermediate period. Why would there be an intermediate period? Because nobody was ruling China after that dynasty collapsed because of the 25-year darkness. They were starving. Total infrastructure collapsed. When, just like scientists all say, just like Zechariah Sitchin acknowledged right here, the whole world started waking up at the same time. In Egypt, we now have the Amuru ruling. Now we have the Hittites and we have the Amorites of Mitanni. These are all Amuru. Now they're ruling strong. Byblos and Ugarit and Ebla and Bashan. Now the Amorites are in full power. The Hyksos all throughout this area of the world, Mediterranean. So it's really interesting that 1662 BC is the date of the beginning of the Shang dynasty. That's awesome. I think that's awesome. It totally agrees with what else is being presented here. And something else that agrees with it is that the version of the 7-year famine in Egypt that's in the Bible concerning Joseph and the sons of Israel and all that, the 7-year famine in the biblical chronology, according to biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, he dates the end of that famine in Egypt at 1652 BC. So even the biblical writers acknowledged that period of time was a dearth. There was no food. It's crazy. It's amazing, actually. Let's see. All right. Meryl, I just saw other people acknowledging your question. That's not something you're really going to want to dwell on. It was a very dark period of history, and I'm very confident, based off Greek traditions on the Cyclopes and other stories around the world for that period of time. I'm very confident that whole communities were eating each other, and yeah, they don't even need to go any further. So it's been 2 hours and 10 minutes, but now we got to the juicy. Here it is. Clash of the Titans and the Red Star of Phoenix. Jamie Robbins, you're right. It's Long Pig. In the act of cannibalism, it has been masked. It has been turned into euphemisms in a lot of mythologies and traditions and stories. The most revealing story from the old world concerning the Phoenix is the myth of Perseus and the Medusa. Made popular again by the hit movie Clash of the Titans over 35 years ago. There's a new one, but it's not as good as the old one. The Kraken was a colossal sea monster that threatened to destroy the city of Argos if the people didn't offer a human sacrifice. Argos is a part of the Ogygian narrative. The beginning of the myth is very telling. As soon as the story starts, the sun darkens and the Canaanite city of Joppa is flooded. Joppa is a part of the Ogygian narrative in the traditions. Eusebius and Jerome, following more ancient authors, wrote that the Ogygian Deluge occurred in the reign of Phoroneos, the second king of Argos. According to the Annals of the World, Archbishop James Usher, right here, King Phoroneos of Argos was ruling in 2208 Annus Mundi, the year 1687 BC. Can't make this stuff up. So, the girl Andromeda was offered, and Perseus went on a quest to kill the Medusa to use her eyes against the Kraken to save Andromeda. Andromeda was the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia of Joppa, a Canaanite city. Queen Cassiopeia offended Poseidon, the god of the sea. Andromeda was chained to a rock to await being devoured by the Kraken. This is descriptive of a ritual sacrifice where somebody is chained to an area where high tide would kill them. The sea would take the offering. No human would be involved in the actual ritual. This is what it was. This is what it was, guys. Now, the legend took on different proportions. Sometimes people would go back out to sea and they would see crabs and other creatures eating the cadaver. And this turned into like stories of Medusa. But there's also another ritual from the ancient world concerning the age of Poseidon that was practiced back then. I'm going to read it to you straight out of this book. So, this monster, the Kraken, it's been depicted as a giant squid in traditions, and this even on Greek art, it's always a giant squid. This carryover involving tentacles and human sacrifice is what produced the tradition Medusa hundreds of years later. A once beautiful goddess who was later turned hideous, but she survived. There are memories of the ancient Bronze Age ceremony of human sacrifice when a large squid was set on top of a paralyzed victim. Let me explain. In this book here, this is by Ignatius Donnelly. This is Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Can't judge a book by its cover. This is from the 1880s. This book is packed full of data. Lots of data per page. It's huge. It's a huge book. This is published by my publisher. This copy is and you know I like it because it has like over 20 pages of bibliographic references. It's a literal library in the back of notes. But the actual text of the book you can learn from the bibliography too, guys. It's amazing. It's got 350 something pages, but the pages are packed with information. In this book, we read, in this book, human sacrifices were first paralyzed by being stung by a poisonous jellyfish and then eaten alive by giant squids, which explains the current misrepresentation of Medusa, the Gorgon, with the arms of a squid as her hair. Andromeda was chained to a rock, but she lived. But many victims of sacrifice, men and women, died as a large squid on their face devoured them. In the story of Medusa, she was beautiful at first, but later in life, she was hideous. You would be hideous too if you had been rescued, like the story says. Perseus rescued Andromeda from being sacrificed, but not before the Kraken had already done damage to her face. So, yeah, that she survived is the origin of the Medusa being ugly. So the hero Perseus, which means destroyer, rode a Pegasus, a winged horse. Now, archaeologists have found coins from the Bronze Age dated about 1500 BC that depict a winged horse. This is interesting. The horse is the symbol of Poseidon. Horse sacrifice was a ritual of Poseidon worship. The horses were cast into the sea from high cliffs. There's high precipices all over Greece, all over ancient Achaia and the Mediterranean. They would sacrifice a horse by running it off the cliff into the water. Now, there's no doubt that onlookers would see this and make jokes about a flying horse. Origin of the story, Pegasus, of the symbol Pegasus. Poseidon's early link to the horse may have been due to the association of the horse-drawn chariot of the sun god Helios. When Phoenix darkened the sun in 1687 BC, it was Poseidon's sea and earthquakes, because Poseidon is the god of earthquakes, that wrought all the destruction. Therefore, to ancient observers, Poseidon was quite capable of warring against the sun itself. This is the mindset of the ancient survivors. They knew something attacked the sun, like a kraken. They also knew that all the destruction was the ocean coming in, tidal waves, tsunamis. They knew that a sacrifice, the reason it happened is because the sacrificial victim had been rescued. If she had been allowed to be devoured by the kraken, then they may have survived. To them, this translated as Poseidon of the sea was more powerful than Helios of the sun. So now we're gonna go deep. We're gonna go deep into the Greek mindset here. We're gonna go deep into the Greek mindset, guys. We're about 12 to 13 minutes done with this presentation. A cave in Phagalia, in the land of Arcadia, has art depicting the corn mother, Demeter, a woman with a horse head who hid from Poseidon in a cave where she remained until a famine threatened to exterminate the human race. All right, guys, this is the story of a cataclysm in the Bronze Age, showing that the sea was more powerful than the sun. The four horsemen mastered formerly by Helios were now taken by the more powerful Poseidon. Poseidon is now ruling after this destruction. The hiding in a cave is an old Bronze Age description of the sun disappearing. And Demeter's absence and famine is due to the loss of solar power to allow corn to grow. And resulting in famine, the resulting famine confirms other traditions regarding the 25-year darkness after 1687 BC Phoenix disaster. During such a food shortage on land, many peoples then turned to the sea for their sustenance, further empowering religious allegiance to Poseidon and away from the corn mother, the goddess, and away from the sun, Helios. This is how Poseidon became the greatest of all ancient Greek gods before Zeus came into power. So this is what was going on, guys. The hiding in a cave is also what's found in the traditions of Amaterasu of ancient Japan, where we find the goddess Amaterasu was the sun, and she hid in a cave for a while. Same story, but this time it's Demeter. Demeter was the corn mother, and when she hid in the cave, no food was available to the people, so they turned to Poseidon worship. They began to worship the sea, and they began to become a mariner race, and they began to fish and basically focus on the sea for their food. This is the background to the legend of Perseus and the Kraken, which was a personification of the chaotic sea during the flood of Ogyges. In later Greek times, the tradition surfaced that Zeus had physically taken Demeter to bed and fathered a daughter named Persephone. This is really interesting. This is an ex post facto tradition laid upon a more earlier period. Zeus was a god that was introduced into the Greek pantheon late, but he became the greatest of all gods. Zeus enters the pantheon. He takes the corn mother, which was the 1687 BC goddess. He takes the goddess, basically rapes her, and then turns around and fathers Persephone. Persephone is a name which is a conjunction of two names straight out of the Ogygian story. The first one in Persephone is Perseus, the destroyer, the savior of Andromeda. The second in Persephone is the fiend. You know this as the phoenix. So This is another tradition that basically acknowledges what happened in the Ogygian period. Now, the Eye of Medusa in the night sky, the Eye of Medusa, the constellation Perseus. There is a star called Eye of Medusa. This star is also called in Arabic Al-Ghol. Al-Ghol is the ghoul, signifying an undead creature, also known in other traditions as the blinking demon. This is a red variable star. In the Perseus constellation, it marked a region of the night sky that was feared by Bronze Age humanity. The Eye of Medusa is what turned the ancients to stone. Algol is a variable star. It is actually called by astronomers Beta Persei. It's also called in the Near East the demon star. In the story of Medusa, who long ago turned men into stone, which was an old metaphor for perish by disaster, long ago fossils of animals and even people were found, and they were interpreted for what they were: the petrified remains of those who died in a cataclysm. In fact, the word disaster is derived from two older roots, meaning evil star. The word catastrophe means falling stars, and the word hysteria, people going crazy during a disaster, the word hysteria derives also from the word star. In 1902, a red star appeared just before our own world, just over 100 years ago, 120 years ago, in 1902. A red star appeared in the sky, and then right after that, red dust, red mud, and red rain fell all over the world. I show this in my books and videos. Charles Fort, right here in this book, I've showed you guys many times. Charles Fort, right here in the Book of the Damned. The Book of the Damned is all the data that has been damned by the scientific community because they practice exclusions, and they don't report this wealth of material in this book that's almost 1,000 pages. So all this in the Book of the Damned, Charles Fort says that all this stuff happened in 1902. He didn't understand it, didn't try to understand it, but he said it was another dark age. 1902 was another dark age, seemingly edited out of our memory. So we have a star called the Blinking Demon in the Perseus constellation, the Eye of Medusa that turns people to stone. Perseus is located in the northern stellosphere. Phoenix always appears suddenly out of the blackness of the northern stellosphere. Just like in 1764, astronomer Hoffman is looking through his telescope when an object that is not supposed to be there comes out of the northern heavens, passes over the surface of the sun, and then keeps going south, and he recorded his trajectory, and this is why he was not believed by the Astronomical Society, but because of his prestige, you can still read the account in the astronomical minutes of the Royal Astronomy Society, because he was a peer-reviewed astronomer, so he's one of the peers, so they went ahead and put it in there. And it was the month of May, 1764. Also, there was 500,000 Europeans that looked at this with the naked eye. So it came out of the northern circumpolar stars. So the Phoenix in ancient times is a winged cataclysm. This is why the red sun that's always shown on Egyptian stuff has the great Phoenix wings. Yeah. Egyptologists tell you this is a solar symbol. It's not a solar symbol. It's the phoenix. It's the red sun. You see it everywhere. Zechariah Sitchin too. Zechariah Sitchin was bad about saying, oh, every time you see that red sun with the wings on it, that red star with the wings on it, hey, that's Nibiru. To Zechariah Sitchin, everything was Nibiru. Zechariah Sitchin was Jewish, but he should have listened to his Jewish brother, Abraham Maslow, because Abraham Maslow would have told him, hey man, look, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every single problem becomes a nail. If Zechariah Sitchin would have taken that advice, he would have realized, okay, man, maybe not everything is Nibiru, because that red star with those wings that's found all over the ancient Near East and Egypt is not Nibiru, and nor is it the sun. It is a depiction of the phoenix. So let's go with so other blinking demons are found. There are other stars that are noted to be blinking demons by the ancients. Blinking demons are scientifically called variable stars. These are the only stars in the sky. They're all red, and they all change their magnitude, and it's inexplicable why they do that. Other stars are fixed, and they basically stay the same magnitude all year long. Variable stars don't. They're red, and they change their magnitudes. I've told you why in the past. I'm going to tell you again here. These blinking demons are called variable stars, and they are red, and they change their magnitudes mysteriously. In Cepheus constellation, Cepheus was the father of Andromeda. In the Cepheus constellation is located an unusual variable star. Astronomers call it Herschel's Garnet star. It is one of the reddest luminaries visible to the naked eye. Cassiopeia, the wife of Cepheus, the mother of Andromeda, Cassiopeia constellation also has two variable stars. The constellation Andromeda, the sacrificial victim, has 5 variable stars. Variable stars, unlike the other luminaries, change their brightness and were the most feared objects in the night sky. Andromeda, Perseus, Cassiopeia, Pegasus, and Cygnus are all in the northern stellosphere. They're all grouped together directly above the constellations Aries and Pisces, the beginning and the end. They're right there, all of them together, the most feared area of the ancient sky. Now, if you remember, Cygnus is the Cygnus Rift. It's the swan, it's the wings. That's how it's depicted in ancient art, the wings. So the Cygnus Rift is a great tear in space. It's like a great darkness. We can't see through it. We don't know what it is. There ain't no stars in it. There ain't no galaxies in it. It's just a big old rift in space. It's impenetrable with telescopes. It's called the Cygnus Rift. Now, variable stars are very active during disasters. When stars are evil. Disasters. Stars are evil. That's what disaster is. Now, disguised as real luminaries, but they are actually local objects that coordinate attacks against our world. Projecting phenomena. I've told you this many times. All these variable stars act up during Phoenix phenomenon, and they literally become projectors of the phenomenon itself. Next variable star cataclysm, we already know, guys, it's May 2040. I've already told you earlier in this video, all you got to do is go 1687 BC is the year 2208 Annus Mundi. From 2208 Annus Mundi, you can sit there and go 138 plus 138 plus 138 plus 138 plus 138, and you're going to get to the year 5934. Annus Mundi. When you get to 5934 Annus Mundi, you can easily verify that 5934 Annus Mundi is our year in the Anno Domini calendar 2040 AD. So, and in the Andromeda constellation above Pisces, the end is a binary system discovered by astronomers called 36 Andromedae. One star in this binary stars, 2 stars. One of these orbits the other. The orbital period of one star. Now, I'm not saying the sky is real. I believe it's a hologram, and I believe all this data is there for our discovery. These are Easter eggs for us to discover. We're looking at programming. We only perceive it differently. So, one star orbits another at 165-year cycles. So astronomers have determined that 36 Andromedae, a binary system way out in the constellation Andromeda, is one star orbiting another star, and they've determined that it's very unique. Every 165 years, it makes a full circle. So they've also determined that the last periastrion of this 165-year cycle was the year 1957. So I find that really interesting. I want to look at that real quick. I find it so interesting, I got to look at it. Let's see. According to the astronomy reports, the last periastrion period was 1957. And according to the astronomical output, this means, as observable from our world, the maximum separation between these stars, one orbiting the other, the maximum separation when they're farthest apart is the year 2040. I don't know why these astronomers think that's relevant. I don't know why they even studied this, but this is their output. Whether it's relevant to our research, I don't know, but I find it highly coincidental that variable stars in the Andromeda system surround 36 Andromedae, which is a binary system that shows us that the next time that a full cycle is complete for this binary is the year 2040. That's it. That's interesting to me. But why is all this important? Why is all this material in this presentation, in all 5 presentations, especially in this one, why is it so important? We have it's all important because of the 138-year Phoenix phenomenon. It's important because, like I said, with a calculator, all you have to do is do your own research. It's real fast. 2208 Annus Mundi was 1687 BC. 2208 Annus Mundi is divisible perfectly by 138 all the way to 2040, which is the year 5934 Annus Mundi. This should cause you some alarm. We have 16.5 years remaining before the Phoenix phenomenon is going to happen again. Can we predict the magnitude? I don't know, but we can look at Nostradamus and Mother Shipton and pretty much ascertain things aren't going to be too good. So we can also look at the 6th seal of Revelation, which is dated perfectly 2040 as well, and I show you how that date is derived. We're also following the Greek Olympiad calendars to show that this breaking of the seals also reveals that 2040 is the breaking of the 6th seal. It's on the 4-year Olympiad system the elite are operating by right now, with the breaking of the first seal being the whole COVID narrative with the attack of the pharmaceutical companies against the human race, started in 2020. That's on the Greek Olympiad calendar. Every 4 years, a seal will be broken. Next year, a seal will be broken. It'll be the 2nd seal. 4 years after that will be the 3rd seal. Follow this up, and it naturally happens. The 6th seal is May 2040. So, yeah, by many different species of analysis, we find that all of this information is perfectly synthetic. So, this history makes absolutely perfect sense. One of the most penetrating statements recorded 2,500 years ago. Plato recorded Solon's interaction with the Egyptian priest at Sais. Here is a passage straight out of Plato concerning this unusual phenomenon. Remember, Manetho's 1752 years encompasses 3 great floods: 3439 BC, 2239 BC, and 1687 BC. 1,752 years of Manetho is perfect. So we have here, this is what a priest told Solon circa 600 BC. When the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains. But those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. Just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and other requisites of civilized life, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like a pestilence, comes pouring down and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And so you have to begin all over again like children and know nothing of what happened in ancient times. You remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. You and your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of them which survived. And this was unknown to you because for many generations, the survivors of that destruction died, leaving no written record. These are the words of the Egyptian priest of Sais to Solon, as preserved by Plato. This PDF has a bibliography number. It goes up to the number 286. You're more than willing to check it out. you can spend the rest of your life reading all those books mentioned in this bibliography. That's how many there are. This PDF will be available 5 minutes after I quit this video. But just so we're clear, those of you listening to me, I have completely made my case in these 5 videos for the Ogygian Deluge, so popular in ancient text, to be 1687 BC. Therefore, it is a part of the Phoenix phenomenon. That is my conclusion. That is my case. This presentation is done. And because this is 2 hours and 40 minutes, you guys know I love you. I'm hungry as hell, and I appreciate y'all joining me. I really do appreciate you spending this time with me, getting all this out. But I'm gonna make that PDF available to all of you. You're gonna want to download it for free off Podia. You're gonna want to share it. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So I think all the PDFs are available for free for the whole Ogygian series. I'm pretty sure. I'll figure it out. But for now, you're gonna get that live outro.